I am John Travis in Mullumbimby, New South Wales on the 10th of February 2020, talking to Ann Watts in Santa Rosa, California, where it's the 9th of February. And Ann, I've known you about 10 years now, met you through Human Awareness Institute High that we'll get to eventually. And I met my partner Yvonne that same time I met you. So we're going to explore your early roots, where you were born, siblings, early childhood influences, what made you who you are. So take it away, Ann.
Oh, well, let's see. I was born in 1942 in Evanston, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. The second child of Alan Watts and Eleanor Watts. And
This is
yeah,
the Alan Watts for our viewers that may not know that.
this is, quotes, the Alan Watts, author and lecturer and of some note. Yeah, and at the time that I was born, he was an Episcopalian priest and the chaplain for Northwestern University. We had a chapel in the house, and it was beautifully put together, and my father used to hold services right there in the house. And I mean, he had a church as well, and also at Northwestern. But we did have a chapel in the house, and so that was a part of my beginnings in the world. And so yeah, my parents had an unhappy time of it in their marriage, and my mother left my father, and she annulled the marriage. My father was a believer of having multiple partners, and my mother was in no way up for that. And so she left him and annulled the marriage, and I moved with my mother to New York City. And then
How old were you when you moved?
I was, let's see, I must have been about 5. Yeah. In the meantime, my mother had a son. So my sister was 4 years older than I was. And when she was born, my parents were very happy. And she was greeted with open arms. And then when I came, the marriage was falling apart. And my mother definitely took out her unhappiness on me. And so...
How did she do that?
Well, my mother once described, my sister described hearing me screaming outside of the nursery, and she came in, and my mother was wailing the tar out of me in the crib.
Wow.
And my mother just told my sister to leave. And later on, I had this experience where I revisited that moment where it was like wanting God to take me back, right? But it explained for me this. I've just heard about this from my sister doing a family reconstruction process. And my sister told that story, and it explained to me why I never fought for myself, why I never stood up for myself, because I learned in the crib that wasn't going to do me any good. So that was a part of my my upbringing. So we moved to New York, and we were joined. Well, before we moved to New York, my mother gave birth to a son who was the child of her lover at that time, who my father had encouraged her to have. He was a student at Northwestern and taught my mother piano. And I adore him to this day. He's in his 90s. And he was like a rock in a ground for me all through childhood years off and on, because I didn't get to live with him much, but always, he was always there. He could always listen. He could always empathize. So he was a very powerful person in my life.
So you moved to New York with your brother, and then his father, was still in Chicago, or did he come to New York too?
No, his father, my half brother's father, he was born, and because we were living with Alan on the birth certificate, he was Alan's son. But later on, it
Oh,
was uncovered that that wasn't true. And his real father, Carlton Gamer, had to uh, adopt him because on the papers he was officially Alan's son. But anyway, yeah, he followed us to New York. Carlton did, and we lived in my grandmother's brownstone house in New York City near Central Park. She had a 5-story house there, and we lived on there was an entire apartment on the 5th floor where I lived with my mother. And, but we had the run of the whole place. My grandmother was Ruth Fuller Sasaki. She's my mother's mother, and she was the first woman and the first American accepted into the Zen priesthood in Japan.
oh,
And she became a priest, not a nun. She was a priest.
hmm.
And so she was given a temple at Daitokuji and served there until her death. But at the time, she was living in New York. And when I was first there, she was married to her second husband, Sokian Sasaki, a Zen priest. And they began the first Zen Institute of America in New York City. And so that was,
Fascinating.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, there's been a whole lot of that kind of Asian, Japanese influence in my life, both from my mother and my father's. Um,
Was
yeah.
that what brought them together, or I guess it was later your
Well,
father?
no, they actually met at the Buddhist Society in London.
Oh,
And not so long ago, my sister and I wrote a book, The Collected Letters of Alan Watts.
yeah, I saw that.
And we were able to do a reading, a book reading
Hmm.
at the Buddhist Society in London,
Oh,
back where our parents had met. And it was really fun. It was a great experience to be able to do that. Yeah.
so how did they happen to both be in London? What was their?
My grandmother had been invited to the Buddhist Society to speak, and my father was a member. His father was the secretary of the society. And
I thought he was English. I've forgotten that.
right, he was English.
Well, naturally, he'd be in London. Yeah.
Right, right. So that's, that's his birthplace. And my mother had been brought by her mother. And my mother was a pianist, and she had come to study with a great teacher there in London.
Hmm.
And but she went to the Buddhist Society with her mother, and that's where she met Alan. And my grandmother was actually very, very much promoted the relationship between the two of them. And
Now you said Alan was Episcopal, but wouldn't he be Church of England if he was
he
in?
was Church of England.
So he
And the
just
closest thing to Church of England in the US is Episcopalian.
so they could swap
So
over.
he didn't go to seminary until he was back here in the US.
Oh, okay.
They moved just at the beginning of the war, they moved to the
Uh-huh.
US. And yeah, so that's, and my sister was then born here in the US. And then
Mhm.
4 years later, I was, yeah. So that, those beginnings.
Uh-huh.
And uh, let's see. So then I was sent to live with my father and stepmother in Millbrook, New York. And then my father got a position at the first Academy, the Academy of Asian Studies in San Francisco. So we drove out to California, and I was about 7, I think, when we moved out here.
Is that the predecessor to CIIS, or is it
Yes, it is. It was the that. So,
CIIS being California Institute of Integral Studies for our
right,
viewers?
right. Which is where Alan's library, we gave them Alan's library. And I'm sad to say they didn't keep the library intact as a unit, but spread the books throughout the library, which I'm kind of sad about. I wish they had kept them all together. It would have been, I think, more exciting for students who are studying Alan. It would have been more interesting. But anyway.
How old were you when you left New York and went to live with, did you say your son?
Well, I was about, I must have been 6 when I moved from New York City to Millbrook, New York, where
So
my father was living then.
A year.
Yeah.
Oh.
And
where's Millbrook? I don't know.
Millbrook? It's north of New York City, near Poughkeepsie. It's I always say that wrong, but anyway, it's where what's his name? Not Ram Dass, but who's the other one who worked with Ram Dass on the LSD? Right.
Tune in, turn on, drop out.
Right.
Anyway, our seniority.
I can't remember his name in the moment, but I should. Timothy
yes.
Leary, right? And
that's right. That's how I know Millbrook, of course.
Right. And he lived there. So, but not when we were living there. He lived there later. But in any case, when Alan got the job in California, which is where he really wanted to go anyway, we drove cross country and we lived in California. And I really fell in love with California. I loved it. However, living with my stepmother was very difficult. And I had a stomach ulcer at the age of 9.
Ooh.
And my grandparents came and saw what was happening, and they arranged, with the help of my other grandmother and my mother, for me to come and live with them in England and go to girls' boarding school right around the corner from where my grandparents lived. And so I did that for 5 years.
And now your mother was still in New York?
My mother ended up moving to Colorado Springs because it was better for her health. And so she and my stepfather and my brother Michael all moved to Colorado Springs.
Oh, okay. So you weren't with your stepbrother that much then.
Right. And then so 7 to, well, I was 7 to 11. I was with Dorothy. When I was 11, I moved to the UK. And I turned 12 that summer, that 11, almost 12. Yeah, so I was there from 12 to 17.
You were a so-called public school, which is a private school in England?
Yeah. Girls' boarding school. It's now a girls and boys boarding school, but back then it was a girls' boarding school.
And how was that for you?
And well, at the time, I knew that it had saved my life. I knew that. And it was an interesting experience in that the people who were my age were a lot less mature than I was. So the people that I was a maturity level with were the girls in the upper forms, you might say junior high or high school. And but it was frowned upon for somebody in the lower 4th form to fraternize with the older girls. So I had to learn to be a kid
Mm.
really. And I hadn't been a kid and for, I'd been very adult, very young. Um, and so I had to learn to be a kid again, which was kind of a shock for my grandparents because they were so used to me being adult. They weren't used to this little kid stuff. But yeah, and but it was good for me. And I was a bookworm. I was always reading books, and my friends used to resent the books, like because I wasn't available. I mean, I just read and read voraciously.
Mm.
And when I was a kid, younger, when living in California, I used to take my books up in a tree. I was a tree girl as well. I'd always be up in a tree somewhere reading a book. That was my safe place to be.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so then I was there, and then
Now, was
uh,
that in London proper or out in the country
out
or?
out in Chislehurst, which is where my father was born, which is south of London in
Uh-huh.
Kent, and near a town called Bromley. Um, it's the biggest town near Chislehurst. Is a very small town. It's got more urban sprawl around it now, and
But there were trees to climb when you were there.
but yeah, my grandparents had they had an acre of
Mm.
land which they gardened, and it was simply gorgeous. It was
Mhm.
really, really beautiful. And their property backed on to the school property. You had to walk around the block to get there, but it backed on.
Mhm.
So when I was at school and I'd be out on the playgrounds, I could hear my grandmothers ringing the bell for the gardener to come get tea.
Oh,
um, so yeah, and my grandfather used to come around on Sundays it was a Methodist girls boarding school, and he would come around for our Sunday service, and I sang in the choir there and
mhm.
played the cello for a little while.
Now, what became of your older sister? Was she in the?
She was in various different schools. She went to a boarding school. She went to the one in England for 1 year. She lived with my grandparents there for 1 year and went to school there. And she went to a boarding school in Kentucky where she learned to ride horses. And then she went to school in Ojai. So she was often away at school herself.
You weren't very close then, but physical proximity.
By physical proximity, no, we had she, she kind of defended me a lot.
Mhm.
She would, when we were really little living with my mother, she would kind of be my mommy in some ways, and then later, when she would come home, she would defend me against Dorothy, and but then my grandparents came and took me to England, and so that was sad, and so we've grown closer together through the adult years, and
Mhm.
yeah, when I came back to California. I lived with my father, and I worked. I did because I hadn't really felt a strong desire to go to college or anything. So I worked. I worked at a place called the Tides Bookstore in Sausalito, which was a
Oh
very
yeah,
popular place,
yeah.
and I loved it. It was wonderful. People would write poems to me, and it was so much fun. And
Other
then
employees or customers? Who?
customers,
Uh-huh.
yeah. And then I met the man who became my first husband, Joel Andrews, who was a concert harpist. So, and he's the father of my two children. Um, and we were married for 9 years. And we moved to Raleigh, North Carolina during that time, from California to Raleigh, North Carolina. And it was there that we broke up. and I became a single parent raising my kids. That's when I got a job at the School for the Deaf in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's since moved to Charlotte. But, and so I learned sign language and taught.
What led to, was it his career that led you to Raleigh, or how did you happen to?
Just, I was seeing a therapist at the time, and he said to me, who would you have to be to stay happy in this relationship? And I pondered that for a while, and I came back to him and I said, I would have to be somebody other than who I am. And so that was for me like the end. And
But that was after you'd moved, or?
that's after we were living in Raleigh, North Carolina. Yeah, we'd been there for a couple of years before we broke up. And then I stayed on. He moved to Virginia Beach, and I stayed in Raleigh. And I, like I said, I taught at the School for the Deaf. And then I think the school was going to move, and I decided it was time to meet it and move back to California. And so I moved to Bolinas with my two kids then.
As an aside, because you illustrated one of my life passions, which is the challenges of having children in nuclear families, destroys most relationships, from your mother's to yours, and two of mine, that we were never meant to raise kids as couples. And it takes 3.87 adults per infant to meet everybody's needs. So do the math.
Right. Yeah.
Our shame-based child rearing approaches and all the
Yeah.
separation and disconnection. So Bolinas, that's
So Bolinas, Hippieville.
yeah, way up there.
My sister and her family were living in Bolinas.
Oh.
And so that's why I landed there. And my kids went to school there at the Bolinas School, and I got a job as a special ed, a teacher's aide, special ed teacher. And so I taught special ed kids for a few years, and I would a few times a week drive to Point Reyes up north of Bolinas to teach sign language at a kindergarten class because they had a deaf student in that class. And so I was teaching sign language to the children there, and that I loved doing that.
Are we talking mid 70s, early 70s?
Yes. Yeah, mid 70s. Yeah.
A lot happening there with Mike Samuels writing the Well Body book, and that's when Marty Rossman and Irving Oil had a holistic clinic in Stinson and Bolinas. And
I lived next door to Irving Oil's widow. I mean, ex-wife. Widow. Not at the time. Pearl, who I adored. I absolutely adored that woman. She was just so precious, and her kids went to school with my kids. So, yeah. So, yeah, and so I was there for a while. Let's see. Well, and so it was while I was living there that I started dating a man who had, Bob Shapiro had been very involved with my dad, and started the Society for Comparative Philosophy with my dad, and got that going, and great supporter of his. Anyway, he kept telling me about Stan Dale and these workshops that meant a lot to him that he'd done when Stan started back in Chicago. And I thought, well, gee, this sounds like something that's important to you and really meaningful. maybe I should find out something about it. So he sent me to my first workshop. And that was and that was 1983. And I went there. They were the Stan and Helen Dale workshops back at that time. And I felt like I had found home.
Ah,
You know, I just, listening to Stan talk felt like this is who I am, and I want to learn to live and breathe what this man is talking about. And so you know, back then the workshops were titled "What is Sex," and they had beginners, advanced, super advanced, and whopper. Those were the 4 levels. And at the end of my level 1, I felt like I'd been whopped. I thought, wow, really? And what I noticed is that it made changes in every aspect of my life. And it was such an empowering experience for me. And when I went back for level 2, everyone in the room shared similar experiences. They all had that same kind of experience. And I thought, there is something to this. I've done a lot of different workshops over the years, and uh, people always talk about transformation, but I never really experienced transformation until I did my first workshop. And
what sort of things had you done prior to that?
I had done, oh gosh, I can't even remember anymore, but phew. Well,
At the time would have been like Werner's and
well, I did do a Warner workshop, but I did that after I had started high. And I had done, boy, I wish I could remember. Well, but one of the things that I did do was I studied with Virginia Satir, who was the mother of conjoint family therapy. And she was brilliant, brilliant woman. She was one of my teachers and mentors in the same vein that Stan was for me. I just absolutely, I adored her. So
studying with her would have been what, workshops or
yeah.
she
I
was
did.
down on the peninsula, or where was
She lived down on the peninsula. Yeah.
I
And
remember she was an early influence of reading her material, and I
oh
never met her, but yeah. And
yeah, she was amazing.
I first heard Stan Dale speak in '74 at the International Transactional Analysis
Right.
Conference, where I gave my first wellness presentation. I just separated from my first wife and met my first lover, and it turned out that that lover was in the same TA group as Yvonne was. I
Oh,
find out 30 years later. They were in a women's group, 8 of them,
for heaven's sakes.
Berkeley, and Yvonne pulled out a picture, and there was Carolyn in the front row. It was like,
Oh, that's
but
funny.
the only speaker I remember was Stan Dale, and I was in an overflow room listening to him on a speaker. I don't think I even saw him. It was at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, um, and that was like, wow, had a big influence. So you were, where were they doing these workshops at that point, in their home, or probably not at Harbin?
No, oh no, they were at Harbin, absolutely,
Oh,
at the
okay,
Stonefront building. That was before the conference center was built,
right, yeah, I
and
knew
so
that.
we were in the Stonefront building back then. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, it was quite an experience, and but like I say, it just changed my life.
Uh-huh.
And so you know, I very quickly became a team member, and then uh, the 2 people who were, Helen was not co-leading with him so much as Sonica Tinker and Floyd Goff. And Sonica and Floyd would often talk about that they weren't going to keep facilitating that they would leave. And I thought, this work is just so important. It's really, this needs to be, people need to have this experience. It needs to go on past Stan's lifetime. It needs to be more places than Stan can be at once. And so, although I'm basically an introvert who acts as if she's an extrovert, that's what the Myers-Briggs teacher told me. I went to Stan. We had lunch together one day, and I said, I want to learn to do what you do. And it was the most terrifying thing I had ever done in my life. It's that place where I learned the lesson of take your fear and do it anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
And don't wait till you get over it, because you won't. So that's what I did, and it was trial by fire for me, absolutely. And but it was my passion. It was absolutely my passion. I really so believed in what Stan had to teach, and so that I stuck it out, and here I am all these years later, still leading workshops. And for me, it never gets old. The experience is always so extraordinary to be in what we call the room of love, to watch the transformation that happens for people is absolutely. I've actually seen some people's physiognomy change over time, as you know, like the tension just begins to go away, and their whole face looks totally different. And so, you know, like I say, it's my passion. I love it.
Well, given that we can't interview Stan, but he died in what, 2000?
It's been at least 10 years, I think.
I've mentioned my partner Yvonne, and since she's sitting across from me, I'll introduce her to the viewers, and then the two of you. I'd like the two of you to reminisce a little bit. This is Yvonne. Say hi to the folks.
Hello. Hi, Yvonne.
You've known each other for what, 20 some more years. And it was in your workshop that I met her when I did level 3. So, but let's reminisce or reconstruct a little bit about who Stan was, and for viewers. I first heard of him in '74, but you said he started out in Chicago. I remember reading that too, and there's a Wikipedia page on him for years. But how did you happen to find out about his workshop? What was your first contact?
Well, that was the man that I was dating, that was a friend of my dad's,
right.
who knew about Stan and loved his work and told me about it and sent me to my first workshop. So that's how I first heard about it. And but Stan was known as Stan the Radio Man. He started out in radio, and
all right, he was the voice of the Shadow even at one point, and I grew up with the Shadow.
Right.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?
The Shadow knows. Yeah.
Before we dated ourselves.
Stan, and also the Lone Ranger. He used to do the announcer for the Lone Ranger.
That was my other favorite show.
Right. And so he used to, there early in introducing himself in workshops, he used to do those voices. And of course, in the later years, nobody knew what the heck he was talking about anymore. But back in the good old days, people knew, you know, I knew. And so he started out doing that, and then he started the first talk radio show in the area, and
that was in Chicago still.
That was in Chicago, and he interviewed a lot of famous people on his show, and people would call in and ask questions, and he would respond. But he said he began to notice that whenever someone had a question about sexuality, they were taken off the air. They were not allowed to ask their question.
Oh,
And he thought, wow, sexuality is such an important part of being a human being. It's
yeah,
crazy that people don't have a safe place to talk about it. And that was the seed for him to do something about that. That, along with his experience when he had been sent to Japan during the Korean War,
right.
because his first wife says he's not married anymore, so he's a single man and he can go. And he went, and then the commander called him into his office and said, I want you to do a radio show for the men. And so just prior to that, Stan had been, as a reporter, to a party for a movie, famous movie in the right now. Of course, I can't remember the name of it. But he had gone to the cast party at the Geisha House where the movie was filmed. And he quickly got tired of the party and he was out. This place was just gorgeous, really beautiful. And there was this huge aquarium. And he was looking at the aquarium, and this Japanese man came up and started talking to him in Japanese, which of course Stan didn't understand. And the man didn't understand English, but there was some way in which they built a rapport.
Hmm.
And the Japanese man said to him, he had enough English to say, I want you to come, I want you to come live here. And Stan said, there's no way. I'm in the armed forces. So no way they'd let me do that. And the guy looks at him and he says, you will find a way.
Hmm.
And so when this general wanted Stan to do the radio show, he said, well, I'd love to. I can't do it on base. I need to get off base to do it. And so he said, yeah, if you take this other guy with you, the two of you can go off base to do this. And that's how he was able to live in the geisha house.
Hmm. With
And
another man,
and then they had, they had adjoining rooms and whatever, but they both lived off base and he produced the radio show. And in living in the geisha house, the head geisha, he used to tell this story at workshops all the time. I know Yvonne remembers this, where he would talk about the head geisha handed him a stone. And she said, what do you see? And Stan looked at it and he said, I see a stone. She said, thank you, very good, exactly right. And she said, come back tomorrow and tell me what you see. And so he went away kind of baffled, and he came back again and she'd ask him again and he'd say, I see a stone. Very good, thank you. And this went on for several days and he was just like going crazy. What is it that I'm missing here? And then he began to see all of the little markings in it and the little, just all the little things that show up in a stone, right?
hmm.
And so as he was looking at all that, it occurred to him that what he was looking at was the universe. And so the next time he went back, very embarrassed, she asked him, what do you see? And he said, I see the universe. And she bowed all the way down to the floor, the honorific bow. And she said, you are now a geisha.
Mm.
And what he learned about these geishas was that they would treat every customer as if they were royalty, and with music, with art, with intelligent conversation, great food, all of that, they would just treat them like royalty. And he's had this thought, why don't we always treat each other this way all the time?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was another strong foundation from which he built the workshops. And so that's kind of like the backdrop, the history of how the workshops began.
Well, the radio show that he did then, did they talk about sex? Was this preceded or after his?
No, they didn't on the radio. It wasn't allowed in those
This was
days.
before the Chicago.
Right. Well, that was before Chicago. That wasn't even a question. They did music and stuff like that for the service guys. And then he came back to Chicago and did the other radio shows. And then afterwards, he kept doing radio shows, but he started doing the workshops. And he started by drawing stick figures on the chalkboard, and just talking to people and giving them a safe place to come and talk and ask their questions and have conversations about sexuality and various aspects of their sexuality and whatever they wanted, whatever was up for them. And then when he moved to California, he expanded and grew the workshops deeper and deeper, and eventually to cover just life in general. But it included nudity, to have people feel comfortable in their own skin. And one of the things that I really love about the workshops is that people learn how to give each other nurturing touch that's not about leading to sexual intercourse, but is about truly nurturing one another in a very deep and beautiful way. And we're not taught how to do things like that. All teenagers should be taught how to do that. I've always said that I feel like people rush to sex long before they're ready because it's the only way they know how to get touch. I think that's very counterproductive in people's lives.
I think Margaret Mead even wrote a book about it, called Teenage Sterility or something like that, where these cultures where teenagers were very nurturing but didn't have sex.
Right.
Adolescent, I've forgotten the title of the book. Anyway. So do you know when the first workshops were? Was he doing them in the 70s when I heard him speak? Or
we're over 50 years now, so do the math.
70 to 20 is 50 years. So, So one of the things that I would hear about him from Yvonne about the various trips that just so people know, Human Awareness Institute, HAI, is pronounced high.
Also means yes.
Oh,
Hi.
Means yes in Japanese.
And life in Hebrew, Achaim, right? Stan used to always love to say those things.
So in the early days, there would be organized trips to Bali and places like that. He would go on, and I'd hear stories about various antics and adventures and so forth.
Right. He called them, a lot of those trips were what he called citizen diplomacy trips. And especially when we went to Russia or Soviet Union, we would make arrangements to go to people's homes and get to know people in their homes and go to schools and do things like so. It wasn't just sightseeing; it was connecting human to human and heart to heart. And I went on one of those trips. It was really just beautiful, extraordinary experience. Yeah.
So you first met Yvonne, I'm talking to Yvonne, met Stan in about 88, 89. And
yeah, the level one, it transformed my life completely.
From a conventional school teacher to,
Well, the way it transformed my life was that I was living my life in such fear. I don't know how to explain it except to just say that I was just consumed with fear. And I was so consumed with it that I didn't even identify it. It wasn't like I said, oh, look at me, how afraid I am. I just was fear. And that's how I was living. And my body was absolutely consumed with it, my psyche. And so when I first went to the first level one, the stand, it all fell away from me. And it was like a miracle. It wasn't like a miracle, it was a miracle. And
Right.
I just wept with gratitude.
Right.
And chills remembering this all the way back down that long, curvy hill home from Harvard. That with gratitude that I no longer have this consuming fear.
Right. Right.
And I can't explain how Stan did it, but Stan, and I want to presence Helen in this too, because I believe she played a major part in these workshops,
Yeah.
as his partner.
Yeah.
And also Janet, but before that, I still have just incredible gratitude for those workshops. I sent all my friends that I could get to go. They would meet the partners that I had met. There weren't that many, but a couple. And these were such transformative men that my friends said, well, that's it. We would like to meet some men like that and people like that. All my friends went to and did the workshops.
Mm.
And some of them met their partners in that way. So,
Right.
but I wouldn't even know where to begin to talk about the wonderful experiences that I had with Stan
Right.
and Janet.
Yeah.
One I will mention was we were in Hawaii, and they invited me. Stan invited me to come along with them on a sightseeing tour in the car. And it was like being in paradise. I was in paradise, but I was in paradise,
Right.
being in the car with them.
Right.
I mean, to be around Stan and Helen and Janet, they're
Right.
they're the most wonderful, fabulous people that ever lived.
Yeah. So I'm imagining people might wonder what about Janet when you speak about Janet. And Stan was a man who believed in being at choice. And that's one of the primary things that we help people learn about in the workshops is how to be a choice, given so many people grow up thinking they don't have any choices. And one of the choices he made was when he fell in love with another woman besides his wife, Helen, he chose to stay married to Helen. And Helen and Stan invited Janet to be part of their relationship. And eventually, Helen divorced Stan in name so that Janet could marry him and she could be Mrs. Dale as well, which was, is the kind of love they had for each other, that they did things like that for each other all the time. And they lived together until Helen died.
I was going to say the three of them lived together.
Yeah.
And I used to go to their house and volunteer in their office, and I spent the night at their house with the three of them.
Yeah.
Boy, what an amazingly wonderful, lucky woman I felt like to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're just superior human beings in my book.
Yeah. Very special. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, it was done with honoring and dignity and all the things that Stan learned from the geishas is how he maintained his relationships and how he was with everyone. He treated everyone with respect and dignity. And one of the things he did so beautifully was really listen to people and hear them. And so that's become one of the big tools that we teach people now is how to be good listeners. And we have a workshop online devoted especially to really heart-centered listening, and that's Stan would do that all the time with people,
Mhm.
and it made such a huge difference. Yeah.
Well,
So, as someone who used to be terrified of anger, I learned from Stan not to be terrified of anger, but rather to invite somebody who was angry to open up and tell me what they were angry about. It really made a huge difference.
mhm. Now, spend a minute or two on the evolution of the organization. You were one of the first, probably the senior trainer at this point. That you mentioned another couple who were planning to move on. Were they
Oh, yeah. Sonica and Floyd, both of them did eventually move on. And so I am now the oldest and longest serving
Mhm.
facilitator. We have, I think, 9 of us now. There's Jason and Marcy, Jason Weston and Marcy Graham.
Mhm.
They're a couple, and they met at the workshops. I remember when you and Yvonne met, imagine that. And I remember when Jason and Marcy met. It was wonderful.
Yeah,
And and then there's Felicia Williams and so it's Felicia, and then Peter and Donna, Peter Ringel and Donna Spitzer Ringel. They're
yeah.
a
You
couple.
and Peter were my, I think, the first three I went to at Harbin. I actually did my first one in Canberra,
Uh,
um, and that was the other Peter and what is her
Peter
name?
Sandhill, yeah.
Yeah, and Sarah,
Sarah.
who Yvonne did her first level one with. It turned out. So
Uh-huh.
um,
They met through High,
yeah,
the two of them. Peter and Donna knew each other already, but they
mhm,
really solidified their relationship through High, and
uh-huh.
yeah.
So now with the loss of the facility at Harbin Hot Springs with the fire there, and now COVID, it's really altered the structure a lot. Uh, are others of the other facilitators doing online
Oh yeah,
version too? So
we all are. We all are. We had to shift it last March. We had to shift gears really fast and
mhm,
build online workshop. We had been heading in the direction of online. That was on the we were going to do that,
mhm,
but we had to just go into hyperdrive to
yeah,
make that happen.
mm,
And so we're building more and more workshops as we go, and we have an intro workshop, introduction to intimacy, and then loving me, loving you. And one of the wonderful things is that we're developing integration programs after a workshop to
mhm,
help people dive deeper into the tools they got at the workshop.
mm,
And it's pretty extraordinary. The feedback is amazing. And you know, a lot of people had resistance to doing a high workshop online because of the lack of being able to touch each other and hug each other and do all of that stuff. And they poo-pooed it. But what's been amazing is that people have found the ability to create intimacy online is extraordinary.
mm,
And so we have the same, many of the same, for you know, we do things in paired shares, we do things in small groups, we do things in large group. You know, it's a very similar kind of patterning. And um, and I love how people really feel the depth of the intimate connection that they get online. It's extraordinary. And
mhm,
so I highly recommend it to people, you know, especially now with COVID going on, when people are feeling so isolated.
mhm,
To say, oh, well, I'm not going to do high until it's back in person, is to starve yourself of something really wonderful that you can have if you're already someone who's participated in the workshops. And so I tell everybody, do the online work. And then,
Mhm.
as I said, so that's the loving me, loving you. And then we've an active listening training workshop, which is not so much workshop like, it's a real training in the skill of being a good communicator.
Mhm.
And so we give people lots of practice, and we have team members who coach and give evaluations and stuff. And we're about to do our first after workshop practicum, integration practicum for that workshop is coming up starting this week.
Mm.
And yeah, and then there's now another workshop which is more, which is going to take people into more of uh, another level of intimacy. I can't remember the name of it, but they're all on the website at hai.org.
Mhm.
And
I'll put that in the link.
people, it's HAI, it's www.hai1.org. And yeah, so we're developing, we keep developing more and more.
Mm.
And then we're doing a workshop for people of color, BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, all people of color are.
Mhm.
It's specifically to create a safe place for them to interact and be, where they're not like, one of one or two amongst a whole group of white people, but to give them
Oh.
a safer place to get the work and feel safe
Mhm.
to get that work. And we have Felicia, who is a Black woman, and we have a Black man from Chicago area, Tony Holmes, who is our newest online workshop leader, along with Sheila Prasad. She's from Canada, and she's part Indian and Black Indian, East
Mhm.
Indian. She's half, and so she's biracial, and it's really great having them as leaders, and they're, yeah, I'm just so happy we have
I'd
that.
like to go back on your personal life. We last um, left off when you were dating Albert, was it Shapiro?
Bob
Uh,
Shapiro, yeah.
Bob Shapiro, and you had your two boys, and you
I,
were staying
I've got
going.
a son and a daughter.
Oh, son and daughter.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Let's
My
talk about
daughter's,
them. Who's older? What? How did they come?
my daughter is older. My son is 18 months younger. They are both amazing, amazing people. My daughter lives in Santa Fe. Her name is Mira Crean, and she has a dance studio, Pomegranate Dance Studio in Santa Fe, and she teaches Middle Eastern dance, and she teaches funk X and all kinds of stuff. And she's won a lot of awards. She has a program for called Seeds, self-esteem and something that I can't remember the acronym, but it's for teenagers at risk.
Mm.
And so it's an award-winning program, and she does a teacher training to train people how to teach, period, how to teach what she teaches, and also particularly how to teach this program, teens at risk. And so it's spreading around the country now.
And
And
she grew up in Molina, so there was the hippie influence probably that might have led her in that direction.
well, she started out being interested in belly dance, because I was interested in it, and I had been taking it when she was really little.
Uh-huh.
And I took classes in that and African primitive in San Francisco. And and so that was the beginning seed for Mira. And then she, when we moved to Raleigh, two of our friends there were belly dancers, lovely young women, and they took Mira under their wing. And so she got more interested in
Wow.
it from there. And so when she was done with high school, well, even before then, she started teaching. She's been teaching for years and years. But she started out in California, and then she went to St. John's College in Santa
Annapolis.
Fe, and
Oh,
a
there's
great
one.
books college, right? And
Is
so it
that the
didn't,
same one that's in Annapolis then? They
right,
have, right?
right,
Hi.
right. Yeah,
Joseph Tilton Pierce's daughter went to the one in Annapolis, and another young woman I knew when we lived in Charlottesville. It's
right.
amazing
Amazing.
curriculum.
So she really didn't think she was going to be a dance teacher. She's also a phenomenal singer, but
Ah,
she never made much money as a singer, but she made money as a dancer. And so that's where she ended up putting her energy in. And because through her dancing, she just kept finding that she was making a big difference. And so that's what she's been doing. And she's had to shift everything online. And so she has teaching videos and all kinds of stuff. You can find her online as well. And it's just, she's extraordinary. And then my son lives in Santa Barbara. Well, my daughter has a son who's now 20, an incredibly gifted young man. And his name is Max Krien, Krien, and he's on YouTube playing guitar. He's an awesome musician and maker of jewelry and woodworking, and he's just so. I tell him he's a Renaissance man.
mm-hmm.
He's just, there's nothing he can't do. He loves to cook, and he loves to cook Middle Eastern food. And so that's my 20-year-old grandson, son of my daughter Mira.
And he's
And
there?
what's that?
Where is he?
He's in Santa Fe, New
Also
Mexico.
in Santa Fe, yeah.
Yeah, he was going to what's the name of that college in Oregon? He was going to college in Oregon, and but he's not interested in learning online. He's just,
Mhm.
when they can go back to in-person classes, he'll go back.
Mhm.
And but he was studying uh, Arabic, and he went to, boy, my brain is fuzzy today. I'm sorry. Um,
Yeah.
Turkey? Was it Turkey? I forget where he was when that COVID hit, and he had a terrible time getting back home. The students that went, they really had a rough time getting back. And so anyway, so that's Max. I could talk forever about Max. And then my son is in Santa Barbara, and he's married, and they have two sons. They have Oliver, who's 15, and the surprise baby, Eli, who is 6. And Oliver, they're very, very bright kids. And but Oliver's passion is surfing,
Uh-huh.
and so
Okay.
that's what he loves to do. He's also musical, and he's a great student, and he loves his surfing. So
So now you went from Raleigh to Bolinas, right? Or was it the other way around?
no, I went from Raleigh to Bolinas,
And how long were you there? And then let's trace your,
and from
yeah.
Bolinas I went to San Francisco, 1983, where I lived with Floyd and Jim Bridwell and another guy in San Francisco. And
This was the high when you got involved with high.
yeah, that was quite an amazing experience.
And
And
were they grown at that, left home, or were they with you too?
My kids were gone then. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
they had left home.
83, yeah.
Yeah, well, they had left home before I started high.
Yeah.
Um, what would I say more about that? Oh, I wanted to say more about Michael, my son.
Mhm.
Michael Andrews, he has a band, um, and he has a theater group, Boxtails, Boxtales, and he and his partners enact fables from around the world,
Oh,
and they use masks and mime and instruments, and they do it in schools around the country. They're also an award-winning group, and um, and
very
so
creative offspring you have here.
yeah. And then he has a nine-piece band that he's the lead singer for. He plays lots of different instruments, and in this band, it's called Area 51, and they play in Santa Barbara at Soho, which is the most popular dance
Mhm.
bar place in Santa Barbara. And so they play there, and then he plays, weddings and parties and whatever what have you, which of course has come to a halt with COVID.
Yeah.
And so there's no live any of that going on. And they have done some teaching events online with the Box Tales hat, doing some teaching of children
Mhm.
acting and stuff. And other than that, he's gone back to his old career that he had before he became full-time musician and artist. He learned to be a plumber,
Uh-huh.
and so he's plumbing these days and enjoying the heck out of it. And
Mhm.
I love it. I always thought he'd have something to fall back on, but I had no idea how important it would become, which it is right now. And I really love that he's having so much fun with it.
Mm.
It's great. Yeah. Yeah. So, and then for me, it's just been, I ended up going to school at New College of California.
Mhm.
And I did that while I was still in Bolinas. And I took a lot of courses in psychology while I was doing that, and got my BA. And then I did things like suicide hotline training and the San Francisco Sex Information Hotline. And I found that those hotline places give you amazing training in a very
Mhm.
condensed way.
Mhm.
You know, I, I, I just felt it was profound what I learned in such a short amount of time. And then you get experience working with people, which, for when you're first doing it, that you have somebody monitoring the calls and being with you on the calls and stuff, and until they feel like you're ready to be on your own. And I learned so much doing that.
Mm.
Really, it was extraordinary. And for me, that was a big piece of my training to do the things that I do today.
Mhm.
And aside from doing high workshops, the other thing I do is inner child healing. So there's a workshop I do at Esalen called Reclaiming Your Authentic Self. And
Mhm.
that's a 5-day workshop that I was doing while we were doing in-person workshops. And very, very deep and profound and healing for people. And it was me taking the things that I had done to help me heal and putting them out there so that other people could have that experience. And so I do some of that with people online now. Private clients that I see, we do that. I haven't yet created an online workshop, but I'm sure that'll be in the offing somewhere. But yeah, that's
And then you and your sister took up a editing of your father's. letters and publishing them. How did that come
We
about?
did that together. I went out, she had all the letters. She had, and from my, when our stepmother, Jano, died, Joan got all the papers and stuff like that. And so she was going through the files and she said, wow, there are some amazing letters in here. And so New World Library publishes a lot of Alan's work, and they're great. I love those people. And we were there talking to the chief publisher there, and Joan mentioned to him about the letters, and he said, wow, you ever thought about putting those into a book? And so she said, yeah. And he said, well, we'll have to get an editor. And she said, well, I think Ann and I could do that. And so we did. And he had wanted like a 300-page book, and it turned out to be 600 pages. and you know, when we told him, he was like, no way, we're going to have to cut out a lot of these letters. Maybe they cut one or two. That was it. That's all they could. He understood why we put in the letters that we put in.
And these were letters written to Alan, or his replies, or
these are all his letters he wrote, because it's too complicated to get permission.
And he kept copies then, I guess.
He did, you know, because he was on the typewriter, and so he made carbon copies of all his letters.
Yeah.
And his parents saved all the letters that he wrote to them. And so we got all the letters that he had written to them, and all these carbon copies of letters that he wrote to these amazing people. And the funny thing is how often he'll say in a letter, I'm sorry, my letter's so long. He couldn't stop typing and talking to people. It was he had plenty to say to a lot of people. So yeah. It was fascinating for us, and very healing for my sister and I to go through the process. It was really something.
I interviewed Al Wong, Tai Chi master, a few months ago, and he mentioned that your father had brought him into Esalen and really kickstarted his whole career. And I don't know if you ever met or.
Oh, absolutely. I was with my father when he first met Al in Santa Barbara.
Oh.
He was down there doing a seminar, and I happened to be with him. I don't know how or why, but I was. And the minute we walked into that room, I think both of us were so struck by Al. It was like the lights turned on. Al is like that. He's just so incredible. And you know, when I was younger, I used to watch musicals all the time. I loved musicals, and I love people, the whole concept of people bursting into song and dance in the middle of the street, right? And I thought that's how it ought to be. And I have this wonderful memory one time when Alan and Al were doing a seminar in New York City. And we had just been out to eat, and Al and I started dancing in the streets of New York. One of my great memories of him. But I have a lot of wonderful memories of Al Hong. I think he's extraordinary.
Yeah, he's still going at it in his 80s.
He's awesome. Yeah. Forever young. And what a beautiful heart and soul that man is. Yeah.
Well, we're kind of wrapping up here, I think. I don't know whether I've missed any significant chapters of your life that you can recall, or whether you're ready to invoke some parting words to our listeners. Have we missed anything significant?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot here. And and I think if people read the collected letters, they'll find out not only a lot about Alan, but they'll find out a lot about my sister and myself as well, because we kind of tie the story together with personal experiences. So that's a part of the book. And so I think that's I think I've really laid out most of what there is. I would say to people that love is a choice, and you can
Mhm.
keep choosing love. And
That's a
so,
pretty powerful, it sounds like an epitaph.
yeah, but it's so true, you know.
Yeah.
And um, people often think that they fall in love and it's out of their control, but it's really not. We can choose to love, and we can choose to love. We can choose to hate. Um,
Mhm.
and I love, you know, to me, love is such a beautiful state of being and feeling. I love how I feel when I'm in love. Why would I not want to be in love? And so I keep choosing love over and over. And in my experience, when people are treated with love and respect and kindness and dignity, they blossom. It's what everybody wants.
Mm.
So I hope that I would like to see us turning a corner here in the United States back to a more loving environment.
I'm getting a message from Yvonne here too. Oh, yes, duh. She pointed out, you mentioned you have a husband, but we haven't heard anything about him.
Oh,
Uh, and love and
right. So I met my current husband through High,
uh-huh,
and we actually both became team members at the same time.
uh-huh.
And so he, you know, he was not my image of who I would fall in love with. I thought I'd kind of fall in love with a more professorial type, couple of years older than myself. And my husband is 12 years younger than I am, and really gorgeous looking man. And he, you know, he thought he would fall for someone closer to him in age, who was athletic and slender and all of that. And so for, you know, boy, we have our relationship started uh, back in 84.
Mm-hmm.
And it took us a good 10 years before we decided that we were in it to stay, and got married. But it's yeah, and I talk about choosing love. I just
Mm-hmm.
I am so in love with him, and I feel, I often call him the wind beneath my wings, because
Mm-hmm.
he so supports me in all I do. And we're very different. He's a much deeper introvert than I am, and so you know, groups of people are not for him, so he didn't continue being a team member. And he's much more interested in one-on-one, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's small, very small gatherings. And yeah, but here we still are, and we're still in love. And you know, the amazing thing I discovered living in the RV with him and living in through COVID with him is how much I love to be near this man. And I feel so nurtured and fed by being with him, that I never tire of it. It's like, and you know, I when I was doing in-person workshops, I'd often be separated from him while I was doing the workshops. Sometimes he would travel with me when I went overseas or whatever, and but other times he didn't, and we'd be separated for a couple of weeks at a time. And just so always so happy to be back home with him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Well, I'm glad we got him included.
thank you, Yvonne. That was very sharp. Yeah.
So, well, I'm delighted to have this opportunity. We had 2 or 3 false alarms, and we finally got together. And
Right.
um, bless you and your work, and may you continue on into your further youth.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be hanging out with you, Jack.
Yvonne is doing this.
No, to both of you.
Did you bring the ASL, bring that into high? Of course, because you
I
were
did.
teaching.
I did.
That's
Right.
another little tidbit,
Right.
that American Sign Language for I love
Right.
you.
Right.
Love
The
you.
letter I, the letter L, and the letter Y, put them together, you got I love you. And
Ah,
it's become an international sign. People all over the world understand that sign now. But it's from American Sign Language. Yeah.
ah.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
great way to end. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you.
Bye.